Hi, everyone. I'm Suma, and this is John Paul Rice. He has a background in filmmaking, banking, entrepreneurship, and technology. His continued healing and learning from trauma experienced in childhood inspired him to find creative and compassionate solutions for a new paradigm. Hi, John. Thank you so much for reaching out. I'm really grateful for this opportunity.
Suma, it's a real honor and a pleasure to be here with you, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, we had some long conversations over phone. I would love to start from the very beginning of how you got started in these topics and what attracted you to the topics of consciousness.
Yeah. My background, in short, has been a patchwork of things. I think I did everything in reverse. So from the age of 17 to 21, I was a salesman for my father's company. It was a company called Supreme Chemical, and it made this product called Crud Cutter. It's been sold in Home Depot and half dozen other major retailers. It's now known by people that I run into these days. And between the ages of 17 and 21, I took the Home Depot account that I was in charge of in Atlanta, and I expanded it to 3 different regions just from the sales numbers and the margins. I made in total revenue from Home Depot over 3.5 years. I made my father's company about $4 to $4.5 million. And I was just a kid that, with a Word document and a little floppy disk was making, taking digital camera shots and laying them into Word and showing marketing strategies for end caps and all this other stuff. And I laugh at it now but it preceded everything up to now. And I then went into Hollywood after my second or third year in college taking an elective class. I was a very bad student in college in terms of discipline or anything like that. I even made a lot of excuses for things. And really what it was is I just didn't have the stability and the structure from childhood, although I had a model in Catholic grade school and a little bit of high school to know about scientific method and analysis. So long story short is I get into Remember the Titans, and my world completely changes as an actor. Being on a set for 2 months, 12 to 16-hour days on the whole. And you're just like, you're in love with it because it's something that is like, it's bigger than you. It's really what it is. It's bigger than you. It's not all about you or this person or that person. It's like this whole machine. And that was fascinating to me, like looking at it, even though I was a big talker and what I would call a bullshitter now. Because I just didn't know, but I wanted to know. That's about as innocent as that gets. But I was a young man who thought I could learn something and master it. And I had all these gifts in childhood. And so then you go into the adult world. And you learn very quickly that if you go from your dream to reality in an industry that messages one thing, but the reality underlying it is actually something completely different. And you watch a progression of that occur over, 10, 15, 20 years. And you see the ultimate result of that mindset and that mentality, and the actual effect it has on social, cultural engineering, constructions of reality, media, information, entertainment. I had no idea that I had stepped into that den. But in looking back on it, I was so fortunate to be alive and know that coming full circle back to now and looking back on that time and examining that story, it led me down a path of disappointment and, quote, failure, which ended up helping me find myself. And what that means is I went from the actor to the businessman yet again, and then went into banking for about 13 years and some months. No college degree, a temp to perm job, somebody seeing your potential, a parent who looked at a dysfunctional child, that was my boss, and showed me the potential and unlocked it and used my creativity and all my passion and all my ignorance and all my dysfunction, because she had a care in her to not let this little boy who's fighting against his mom and dad who were alcoholics, like she understood from her own lived experience. Those are the if you wish to find blessings and God somewhere in man's divine plan, it's all the moments that preceded the ones before you understood what the value was and the meaning of it was at the time. It's to value your existence at such a level that it's like whatever you can express, as ignorant as you are, there is a divinity in all of it that's working. And that doesn't mean what you believe or think it is. In fact, what we think and what we feel doesn't necessarily reality make. If in anything in this time, we're seeing how people think and feel on a level that we've never seen before, in all ways. The truth is coming out. The ugliness is coming out. All things are being laid out on the table for choices to be made, believed in, walked away from, denied. Everything is being brought to bear in steps, in stages, in levels, whether aware or unaware, the reality of our existence. What are we? What is our role in all of this madness, this collective insanity? It doesn't matter what your understandings are. So how do you come to that when, as a 22-year-old man, you literally are thinking, oh my God, there's so many hot women in this town. I'm going to try to be a good boy, a good Catholic boy in Los Angeles. You know, the way I was raised, I was an altar boy. I did Eucharistic minister at 16, 17, 15. You know, I am the first mass that I was an altar boy on. I did not even go through the training. I had remembered all of the steps, and I watched all three of them, what each one their role was. The only thing I had was not a certainness, like when you're in the play versus the person watching it, you're like, oh yeah, this is the moment that Father's like nodding, like get up here, you know, the timing of it. I'm sharing this because it reminds you that all of this is a metaphor for everything that happened before. You're just playing it out in a drama that it's real and it's meant to feel real and it is real, but it isn't the ultimate reality of you. So I know this all sounds like, it can sound crazy, because to me it's like, it's sane to me, but it may sound crazy to somebody else. You've never heard that before. And what acceptance and responsibility that requires you to have then, if you're going to believe that that's true or possible. It requires some humility. And so whatever happened to me out there led me to a scientific quantum field. I'm trying to just relate it in any which way so that people don't have to go spiritual or mystical or like it's subjective to understand. It's your movie coming back and playing itself back in front of you, and you having new understandings, and you don't stop learning. You become the greatest student of your reality. You find yourself in everything that you do, including your sarcasms and your bitterness and your resentments and all the things that you don't like about yourself that you'd rather people not. You know what the sad part is? It's everything that you want acceptance for that you struggle with. That's really what it comes down to. You want acceptance of yourself and all your shortcomings by people who can. The sad truth is that we're wanting it from all these other people, and really it's only one person that can start that, and that's you. There is nobody that can come in and make you feel love that you can't already feel for yourself. There is that child. This is why we forget. We don't remember what we are. When we look at that child is us. That child is love right in front of us before anything is known. The danger surrounding it is not known consciously by that child. That child only sees itself in relation to its two gods, the mother and the father, the divine feminine and the divine masculine. If the soul is corrupted, if it's dimmed, if it's consciously allowed to be deceived, willfully ignorant of its own hell that it is lived in before it came into the awareness of being a bearer of a child of God itself, manifested again in the most vulnerable and defenseless being, that it can't realize that it literally is speaking and manifesting a reality into existence in that child for whatever it doesn't know or is not aware of. That becomes that child's ignorance. The child will have to learn at an adverse rate to overcome the lesson of the parent who was not able and capable of knowing what it was actually doing at the time to its own child. Yet, holding the contradiction of the behavior while wanting to believe it could still love its own child. No different than a child when it starts wanting to be loved. That's how abuse can occur. That's how narcissism can happen. Not that it just happens out of nowhere, but when the loneliness that you feel today, which is really not about today, because from one day to the next, there is nothing different in the fact that the sun rises and sets, and how you feel about everything in between really shapes your day, moment to moment. So when you step back and you look at this and you say 7.58 billion people, all experiencing their own reality, all experiencing fear to joy on a broad spectrum, not either or, but a mixture of. And it's like, yeah, I plug into that as well. I play my part in the contribution of my own unconscious behavior, for which I think is right. And I'm righteous in feeling that in relation to what I understand and what I know to be true. And that absolute value is then, if you're not aware, you measure it across all other people and judge them on that one dimension. Social media perfects that behavior and that thought process of finding somebody who is wrong and has to be made an example out of, to satisfy an emotional response to some unjust thing that exists in the world. And if we just get rid of that, we're then making headway and progress into, finally getting to that utopia that we all want. And it doesn't exist. It's a farce. It's a farce because it retards humanity into tribalism. My movies, so just to wrap this part up, that opening part, I was an unconscious man who had a boatload of trouble in him, but had some decency and love that was given in sacrifice in steps by strangers. And it helped me wake up, and it allowed me to see the depths about myself in the darkest of places, not because I was those things, but because those things were done unto me, like they had been done unto my mother and father and their parents before them and all their children. And we're at a time in this reality where art is on the line, and art should not be diminished like, oh, that's art, like it's sort of like, yeah, we'll get to that later. It's like art in all its forms, from comedy, which requires challenging the status quo 100%, and it's the most palatable way in satire and self-humiliation, humility. Like if you cut that out, you're stopping voices of reason, people who are seeing you march down a path to the gulag and are trying to warn you and getting through to you without there being much effort to see a different way, to make you go, oh my God, that is true, and laugh about it, thank God. Hello, kitty. She's getting all charged up. Or is it a he?
Sorry, I was on mute. It's a he.
Oh, look at him. Jealous. Okay. I love it. He's like, I'm going to show my back to you. Anyway. Beautiful cat. No, I mean, I can get too dramatic and carried away about it, but at the end of the day, it's like we have to take responsibility in the ways that we have not yet before. And the part that's the hard sell is where we feel obligated to have to do that, as though if we don't, then we're bad, or that we're less than. And it's like, no, give yourself a break for today. The grace that you wish to have, you can receive. Give it to yourself, but don't be blind. Don't remain blind. Don't just give yourself, like, might as well go to confession at a Catholic church. And I'm not slamming a Catholic church per se, but I'm saying it's like I can go before a priest and admit the least of my sins, however I measure them. I can admit the least of my sins, of all the things that I'm truly like embarrassed and ashamed about. And I'll tell him the least of those, and then I'll be forgiven by God. And somehow I get another, get out of jail card, or I can go around the block again and do another round of sin, and then I'll come back to Father, and Father will absolve me, and then I'll be fine. Each step of the way I'm getting cleansed. I'm not saying it's as simple as that, but that becomes the ritual. It gives you a way out rather than to face the reality of, it's better to say it than not. Yes, that's the fundamental nature of it. But if it's not like, my God, man, you need to change, or have you really looked into what is compelling you to have these thoughts and feelings? It's not that the priest can't help and hasn't, but they can't know everything other than what they know, nor can you. And the only way you're going to know something is to have a dialogue with somebody where it's face to face and you can be authentic in telling somebody like all the ugly parts that you may feel at times that are not, they're not apparent. Look at the lady, I mean, regardless of what your understandings are, look at the lady who jumped out of her apartment, committed suicide, Miss America, right? A contestant. I don't know the whole story, but the point being is that there's a bigger story there. Because on the surface, it doesn't make sense. Oh, we get into her dark past and history and all. That doesn't make sense. You don't kill yourself because of the pressure, like externalities are not the causation of somebody who says, I'm going to terminate my life against like everything that's apparent. Like, in other words, your reality is in the emotional reality that doesn't equate to the physical. When it's disconnected, when it's disassociated to that level, there is deeper underlying trauma that exists. That's not a judgment placed against her like, oh, well, she should have gotten help. No. We should have never, society on the whole, should have never, we should not be in 2022 having witnessed a rise in depression, suicides, in drug addictions, in obesity, in nihilistic behavior, in alcoholism, domestic violence, child pornography exploding everywhere. That was not because of one thing. That was years of cultural and social engineering to allow humanity to devolve. We are going to be dealing with part of this generation of children that is being born now and is alive now, but being born now during this time, is going to be a mixture of the greatest minds and innovation and the most degenerative at the same time. And how we're going to reconcile that is going to be on the adults. The children can tell you the truth about what they're living through. It takes an adult mind to be able to understand, oh my God, yes, and we can't keep doing this anymore. Like, we have to put a stop to this. Like, not destroy it, but we have to create something that totally goes against that grain. That irrational, illogical thinking that only perpetuates future victims. That only perpetuates more need to draw people's interest into centralization of power. It's really, what it really boils down to is it's distributive 100%. It's Christ the shepherd. You don't think of yourself when one of your own goes lost again, and you leave the 99 behind and you search day and night, high and low, for the one that strayed yet again, and you carry them back and you put them with the rest and you say, I will do it again. It's however you see that fitting into your reality and the space that you occupy. That is one of the greatest things that you can do, because there is no status to be earned or gained by people, by helping people in need and then praising yourself as though you're a great person and that all good work has now been done or fulfilled and that you're the facilitator. You make sure everybody around you knows how to feed and nourish themselves. You make fishers of men. If you're going to put it and square it in biblical text, like you, man to man, woman to woman, man to woman, say, you know what? At the end of the day, these corrupt billionaires over here or on this side, your group, my group, whatever we think is the good group, that pays for all of this speech to be had in the public discourse and presented to us as news and things that we have to have opinions about, debate about, and eventually vote about because culturally in relation, like it's like it's artificial, but it's not. It's artificial in the sense that if that's the framing of the debate that everybody accepts, then yes, that's the matrix. There it is. It's either this or this. It's we lied to you in the beginning, but now we're telling you the truth. And so everything that, and then what's the net effect? The net effect is more pain, more confusion, more suffering, more poverty, more lack of trust in our institutions and people. And at a certain point, if you fill your head with that all day, it will run you. And it will make you able to be moved in ways that you don't think you're being moved, because you think, well, I'm in opposition to the bullshit, so I'm okay. But really what you're doing is you're responding to that in relation to the only possibility of this or that. And it's one or the other. It's Coke or Pepsi. It's Reebok or Nike. It's right or left, conservative, Democrat. It's the same thing. It translates into other countries as well in terms of their history, their culture. All of this is done through global governments. And it's not a conspiracy theory when you have an entire 2 years of data and observation to watch how global governance in this time played a role in the destruction of society. Supposedly, we were all united in getting a hold of this virus that was supposed to kill us, with a 99.7, 0.8, 0.9% survival. It doesn't matter, and yet there's been no consistency to the message that anybody today can sit here and say, this is what it is. Nobody can say that. Nobody can go out there today and say what something is with absolute certainty and have everybody go, yes, you're right. That is totally true. Nobody knows what's true right now. This has cost us, for all that, let me just say, the last thing I want to say, and then I'm going to let you ask the next question. It's like, at all of this cost to awaken, was this how it had to be? Did it have to put 150 to 160 million, 10 million more, what does it matter? 150 million people, according to the UN, the World Bank, and you can go down the list. Some other organizations say it's lower. It doesn't matter. It's like tens of millions of people worldwide in 2022 are drifting into, or have been already converted into, extreme poverty as defined by the United Nations. This fulfills their agendas, to end poverty that they've helped create. All we have to do is look backwards and see what the net effect was of everything that they've done. Things have gotten worse. We vote for it, we pay for it, we're told it's an existential crisis, we need to fund it no matter what the cost. We'll figure it out later. This is such a dire threat. We have to take care of climate change by taking down tens of millions of acres of trees and putting solar panel fields all over the earth that only heat up the earth. That's a fact. We're going to kill the lungs of the earth to save the earth. We're going to that doesn't mean we can't reduce carbon, but to kill off trees and life as it's all dying. There is nothing on the environmentalist agenda. I'm just trying to get this out there because I am somebody who would tell you that the earth is the most sacred thing that we have here. One of the most sacred things, next to children. The earth it's a living being. It's a conscious living being of forces of God that play out here and elsewhere. Okay, so, but to believe that the billionaire class of any level, plus the institutions that they control, with the scientists that they offer you, and with absolute certainty say that this is what is going to happen and will happen and keep scaring the shit out of you, to march on Earth Day. I don't care what your understandings of the dark occult are or not. I'm just telling you, everything has a utility in the real world of our reality, of our existence, which they know better than most human beings. That's why they're in the positions of power that they have. I'm not talking about presidents. I'm not talking about the billionaires that they trot out in front of you and tell you these are the, Elon Musk and Bill Gates. It's like, ooh, you got to choose. You got to get behind the one that, they're unconscious men serving a world of power. They don't really know what they are. They think they know what they are, and they drift towards the knowledge that they have in relation to the rest of the world as though they're privileged in order to be the purveyor of that knowledge and the arbiter of it. They're made for you and me in the media to believe in. I mean, Bill Gates is the most obvious guy who, all the memes don't add up to anything more clever than to say, this is a guy who was supposedly into computers, had questionable ties with Jeffrey Epstein that are not even debatable or forgivable because it was post-conviction. That was the real tell. After he had been convicted in 2008, 2009, and Bill Gates still associated with it. This is so basically what they saw was, here's how the billionaire class and the legal systems works for the billionaire class. So everybody's okay now. It's hard to explain that to people because the contradictions that we have, Suma, because our conditioning from childhood to now is where we believe in all of these people, that when they're presented in front of us, that they are telling us a truth that is universal and has our best interest involved. And that's not the case. And I just say, like I said earlier, it's the net effect of their policies. It has nothing to do with what they're saying, whether it's true or not. The effect of what they say is what is happening, is what is real, is what is true. And it's not one or the other. It's all things combined that people don't see. And that's why we're in this crazy time where people are giving up and people are digging in, and then there's everything in between, and it's causing all of this disruption emotionally in people to not know what reality really is anymore. And to some, that doesn't even register. And I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm saying they don't feel that. But then for all the other people that are faced with trauma of any kind, this time has been the most challenging on them, the most faith-tested time, where there isn't a certainty out there of when this ends. There's hope that it will. There's hope that things can come back together. There's hope that peace can win out, good can win. There's hope for all of it, and that's not bad. But hope alone requires, for hope to be real, it must be maintained through vigilance. There isn't a hope for hope. There is the lived good that anchors the whole thing and says, if evil comes here, it won't know what to do because we're united together. We're in community together. We're in understanding that I'm not your enemy, even though the television says I am. And in a moment of crisis, you may judge me based on the color of my skin, as I might you, as I might judge my perception of life and reality on you, a man, a woman, a child, an adult, whatever. It's crazy, but you can be the anchor. You have to be. Anyway, so that was a little more than just my career and how I got here, but it's really about having the utmost humility as much as you can, and you'll see yourself in everybody else.
What does it mean for you to be to wake up? What does waking up mean for you?
Waking up, if you were to go to the Bible and it was to say repent and believe, is to see the truth and then you believe the truth. So waking up there isn't a mechanical, like if you do these 10 steps, you'll wake up. I look at like how I quote woke up, and I'm not diminishing that, but if I were to go back 3 years ago and now it's like, Jesus. It's an ever internal journey that with each pain that may come, and I don't mean it just as pain, but I'll get to that in a second. You see the pain in its pastness, so that you create the present but yet future state of joy. In other words, see, the shame and the guilt that was placed upon us in childhood unconsciously, okay? So just let me go back to this, that in childhood, when there is a withdrawal from care by the people that are supposed to give that care, or this is not like a narcissistic demand of a child. This is the biological machine hardwired to mother and father who are God in the sky. The child is in a psychedelic state. It's in a hypnotic state. It's 100% programmable. It doesn't download mommy's pretty face because she feels good about herself that day, although that's true. How the internal reality of that person is downloaded into that child. Okay, all of the child's attachments, the soul connection, the vibration, the energy, the frequency, the waves that are hitting and forming the synapses and the neurons firing and all of those new connections being created is the entire being of the parent. Moment to moment, day to day. All the good, all the bad. Trauma, suffering, loss, all the hardships of life, emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, tested in unconscious behavior that exists in the relationships, exists in the dynamic of the parent to the child, and then the child becomes an adult. Those moments where we don't remember, where the care, and I'm not saying this about everybody, this is to be very clear. People who are, at least in this time, not all of them, because I don't believe in saying absolutely, but in a lot of cases, people are spiritually sensitive due to the nature of our generations before us. And what I mean by that is that our mother and father and our grandparents did not have the language nor the access to the material or the therapies, the information that is out there today in order to be able to name what trauma is, be able to identify the source and root cause of where that pain comes from. We see it external of ourselves, and yet it's really in here. It's both. It's manifested. Consciously and unconsciously. On all levels. And so it's like, if you're going to honor your mother and father and the life that they lived for all, like if your life was priced out, not the one that you would show to everybody else, but if you were to go, okay, like if I really looked at all my behavior and I could judge myself a certain way, I could see myself as very bad, and I don't want to present myself that way to anybody, because that would be stupid of me, right? Because I'm expecting them to judge me the way I see me, right? See, the only way that you could do that is with somebody you really trust. The only way that you can find that, though, is to trust in yourself at such a level that you are not bringing your fears into a relationship that somebody else has to solve for you. There's healing and care and compassion, but I kind of believe in what Jordan Peterson said. He said, marry someone as bad as you are. And not because I think he has absolute answers. I think he perceives consciousness and the divine through a really intelligent academic structure. But what he's saying to me in that is that basically don't cheat yourself and somebody else because you're in denial of something that you really feel and don't want to, or don't want someone else to see, or so you find yourself with somebody who won't look there or remind you of that. And they'll be the one who pays the price. Because what you're doing is you're demanding them not to see that thing about you that you don't like, and you want them to accept you under all the false pretenses and not have to work on that part about you. And then what ends up happening is you end up hurting the ones you supposedly want to love. So like, I mean, I looked at my previous relationships in Los Angeles, and I found myself with people that I, of course, could find the fault in. In fact, sometimes I got to the point where I did, and then I was justified in leaving them. But I helped create that relationship, whether I knew it or not, whether I wanted to believe it was my fault or not. And that doesn't mean that there wasn't problems, there. It wasn't like, oh, if he had just seen it differently, that all of a sudden the person who was mentally ill or a narcissist or had some kind of narcissistic behavior or inconsistent, rational, say one thing, do another, right, and not be equal or consistent. It doesn't mean that you played your part too. And the way to look at it is not to blame yourself for what you didn't know or what you wanted or what you hoped, but to go, okay, the truth of the matter is that I had an addiction to save this person. I wanted to fix them, and I thought that by engaging them on that level, because of the need being so great in them, that I could give them the love that I really wanted. I projected my own love onto them, thinking that would change the outcome for me, just like I did with my mother. And I couldn't change her because of the demons that she had lived through. She could only do what she did. That didn't absolve her from what happened, nor my father. But if you're going to go for the highest level of unconditional love for people who sin against you, that violate you, that betray you, I'm not one of these people. I know the danger in what I'm going to say could be taken like New Age, moral relativism. No. Natural law, not man's law. Natural law is what needs to be integrated into society. This is not a law written by a judge or a legislature. This is the law that is lived in people. There is an inherent sense of right and wrong. That's ultimately, if you're going to talk about spiritual awakening or seeing things, it's to be the adult to your child, to your inner child. It's to break those old loops. It's to intercept the messaging and the conditioning and the automated response, those loops that we create, the order that we have going on in us, to keep revisiting these issues and to try to lay new eyes on it in a way that step of faith for which you cannot see but intuit, and you cannot put into words and give it to someone else, but it divinely speaks to your being in your time and space. And there are no contradictions there. There's the universal truth that is the truth in you and in everybody else, and that's when you know it's true, and that's when you know that there is, like, everything from that, it's like everything from that moment on, you will know all of your lies and your denials, because it's the same. It can't be this and this anymore. It's one or the other, and it's not out of a place of like standing above and looking down below. That's the falsehood. It's the shepherd who smells bad, doesn't bathe. I mean, it's found in all of them. All your, like, the type, like, just to use Jesus as an example, he went to all of the deplorable, the lowest of the low, the adulterer, the thief, the beggar, the leper, the least desirable, people without names. And he spoke to each one of the acts of God in all of these people who were of no consequence to society, on any level of great contribution. Like, if you looked at it like, if Jesus left that area, then they wouldn't be who he said they were. They would go back simply to being in the world and the space and the time that they occupied. But what he was saying is, as a code breaker, essentially, do you not see that being a child of your Father as you are to him? It's like there's no difference in you two. What it brings you to is this level of humility and maybe tears, where you see your mother and father in pictures as babies and 5-year-olds and young adults and teenagers wanting to be in love, having dreams. However you think of them, like what you desire to have love and care. Did they not have those things too? Now, that doesn't mean that, again, that makes them good or bad. It's that the complexity of these things, it requires humility and self-examination on a level, whereas the opposite is narcissistic behavior and all that comes with that.
Can you share about narcissistic parenthood, and like if there is a young person or a child who is going through a similar experience that you did, what are the tips or suggestions you would give to them? Like, what are the early signs to detect narcissism in a parent?
Well, anytime that, this is a complicated one, but it requires, it may require a lot of attempts before you get some kind of understanding. So when I say this, I don't think that it's one way. People who defend themselves against any kind of criticism, warranted, exaggerated, personal, taken personally and not personally, inside, outside, peer groups, common online. Anytime that you put attention on something that isn't true, and you spend maybe more than a minute or two even not even debating it, but wow, that's really weird that somebody would say that about me, or it wouldn't be, oh my God, I can't believe this person said this about me. What are they, who is it? And then that person wants to find out who they are and concoct a story, right, that justifies their position. If you see that consistently, then you're dealing with somebody who is carrying an enormous amount of shame and guilt, more than any other human being, or most human beings. I don't know what the percentages are these days. I think it's less than 17 or 12% of the population, or maybe 7. Narcissism is kind of like the nexus of the worst in people, because you get if you drift further, down that trajectory, then you're going to see sociopathic behavior emerge, and then psychopathic behavior. Okay, and it's just, there's no winning in any of that. So why? And it's not necessarily just oh, okay, well, have pity on them now, because no, they were made that way. I know psychopaths, they have a particular issue because they can't really feel anything. They don't have the chemical, biological process. Somehow it's blocked in a lot of them. The only thing that they can have is a soul awakening. But psychopaths are non-feeling. They don't forget stuff, but they don't have the empathy. They don't have access to empathy. They don't have access to self-reflection or remorse, or any kind of guilt, auto nervous system or not. That's supposedly the thing about psychopaths. Okay. What happens is that with narcissists or narcissistic behavior, it's what I try to, because you can call somebody a narcissist and it's not accurate. Narcissistic behaviors where they're not, at minimum, they're not as valuable as the person who is telling you what is or what has happened. It's their version of the story. And only if there's a way out for them that is, in their mind, because some of them can have a lot of flexibility to bend with people. But if they feel that they can still get an advantage out of agreement, they'll do it. But it's to get you to agree to their side of things. It's never about, oh yeah, you're right about that. Yeah, we should do that. No, it's more like, well, I can see your side, but ultimately this is what happened. It's how they feel. How they feel emotionally is the determining factor of reality in most cases. What creates narcissism is something that's very complicated, because it's not black and white, it's one or the other. But when those child's needs are denied, when that care is withdrawn, that loneliness is got fear covering it to protect it. If it's stimulated, if the child's narcissistic needs in the first year, so the first year and a half of a child being alive, it has narcissistic, what they call healthy narcissism. Most people don't even know this. But it's essentially the first year and a half, the child does not have any drives against the parent. It needs the parent's attention to care and know its needs, based on a language that requires the mother and father, but mostly the mother, to be so attentive it knows what the baby's needs are without the baby being able to express it verbally. Food, discomfort, need change, need to be held, need sleep, need to be fed, need to be walked, need to whatever. The child isn't conscious of any of these, quote, needs. It just can only express itself in as awkward of a state as it is. It's a timeless being. It's a divine being. It doesn't know, it doesn't have a concept of yesterday or tomorrow. It's just there. And if mom and dad are not there, then its world is not there. So when you deny a child its needs, its basic needs, and you, because of how you feel, your indifference to your child, your discomfort, your not wanting to be that best parent today, right? Those are your internal issues, and those are playing a role in developing the reality of that child, because the child only knows in that moment that you're loving it. And anything that it does wrong, it will blame itself, because it cannot conceive that the two people that love it could ever cause it harm unintentionally or in such a way that it just, like here's the practical example. The child is running to the street. It's happy, it's joyous, it's running through the park. And the car is driving along the street. The child doesn't see that, but the adult comes up and pops that child in the butt and says, "What were you doing?" Child has no clue what just happened. Child does not see the danger, does not see the car, was not being willful against the parent. Child was playing. Parent gets mad for what reason? Well, that's a whole other issue that it has to answer as to why it felt getting an angry emotion out on your child in a moment that took him away from the joy, and he or she would have never known the danger it was in. Why it needed to be responded with a punishment. As though now the child lives in fear, what? Because out of nowhere something can come in and completely cause it panic and fear. That is an ingrained emotional reality of the body that the mind will have to banish, because it doesn't make any sense how you can go from total joy to complete fear and guilt and shame for having tried to enjoy yourself and not seeing the threat that the adult saw, and putting that, quote, responsibility on the child as though to teach them a lesson through fear. This is the shit that has created all of this crap that we see in the world manifesting today. It is authoritative, it's submissive, it's about obedience, it's about, if I don't do this, my child is going to be a terrible person. If I don't correct this one behavior now, if I don't stop them from doing the thing that they want to do that I think is wrong, or can't have a conversation with, to be able to say how it frustrates me without having to knock them in the face, or as they get older, insult them to their face by saying harmful, hurtful things to their own children, and then expecting that child to love them. These contradictions that we create inside our homes get played out in real life among the collective. Narcissism, when you deny a child and you replace the lack of care with blame and guilt and shame on that child takes that in as a program. And depending on a number of factors that I don't really, like, there isn't like a formula to it, but you are tipping the scales in a direction where that person will defend themselves to such a level as to what they believe is true if their entire lives have been hell. Like if you think that by disciplining your child through threats and fear is going to make that person a non-compliant, creative, rational, loving human being, you are rolling the dice. And let me just say this, in a future state of surveillance, the state will decide at a certain point if you're a threat to society or not, if you don't get it under control. They are planning to control people's behaviors and monitor them in the homes, just like they do in China now. And that won't be everywhere, but it will be in a lot of places. And I'm not threatening that to say, well, you better be on your best behavior, otherwise the state's going to come in and get your child. It's like, no. What I'm saying is the necessity to have a surveillance state at that level will be eliminated when people take their own responsibility into their hands and stop denying the reality, the emotional reality of their childhood and how it has played a role in their entire life, how it has played a role in every single person's life today that we are witnessing unfold, the emotional reality of their childhood with all the good and all the dysfunction going into it. This is the awakening. The awakening, the real awakening, is to see, unfortunately, some of the darkest horrors that are part of our unconscious behavior manifesting and materializing into the world. And it's going, okay, are we okay with this? Because this is the thing that we all know is the world of Satan coming into being. And if you don't put a stop to it at a certain point, or try, when I say stop to it, I'm not talking about a fight. I'm talking about your own inner demons. The thing that Carl Jung talked about, the shadow. And I'm not going to sit here and try to give some kind of lesson on that as though I know all about the shadow, but I can tell you this, the dark night of the soul, I've had that for most of my life. And I fought through it until I surrendered to the truth about it, and then I could love myself way more than me trying to find love. And it's not easy. Like it ain't, oh yeah, if you just do this, then all will come to you. It's like, yeah, all and more. You know? It's like, be careful what you ask for. But if you're strong enough to, well, let me say this. What you think you're strong enough is way weaker than you actually are. But infinite consciousness, in the sense that each person is more fascinating and more incredible each time you go back to them. More incredible than you. That's my hardest lesson. I'm trying to reverse being self-absorbed as a protection part of myself and resolving my generosity on the other side. So it's like what a polarity to deal with, but it's true. It's like, okay, like you just want to live yourself to be the most authentic human being that you can, narcissist or otherwise. Because it anchors so many different things in the world that you don't know you're affecting, versus waiting for the right diet or the right spiritual, process, belief system to come along, the healing modality that you need to, the sound bath. And I'm not putting these things down. I'm just saying that I had to learn to let all those things go. And not because they didn't help me, but that they weren't the thing I had to believe in order to get the thing that I wanted to get. That I could try to live that every day as I struggle, and yet that be divine in its conscious expression in the limitations that it always has been. And to go, okay, well, what are we here to do? Or what game would you like to play today? And it's not a game of just chance and all that, although there's destiny involved and what it all means. But it's like, if you're willing to let go of yourself a little bit and say, okay, I stepped into it. I really stepped into it. I did a viral video in 2020, in August of 2020, that's now been seen by over 100 million people. That wasn't pre-planned. When it happened, there was only less than 700 followers on my Instagram. I had maybe 8 people max watching at the peak of it, and probably 1 to 2. And then I sent it out to a couple of people, and then all of a sudden, within weeks and months, it just blew up all over the internet. 6 different translations. And why I'm saying it is, it has nothing to do with that. It's like, you are that powerful. Each and every single one of you is that powerful. The The narcissistic behavior can be defeated when you stand your ground and you don't let them change the subject on you. That's what they try to do. They try to change the conversation and reposition it, re-angle it, try to reacquire another, level that they can, control things. And it's because of their lack of control that they do this. That the internal feelings are horrible. To banish them is to banish all guilt, all shame. So they don't want to feel that. And so if you think you're going to win by making them feel that, that's when it becomes a personal attack on you. Because, look, I had, my mother and my father, different narcissistic behaviors. I learned in steps how to deal with that. And accept them for the people, accept them at a level that, not accept them because I had to accept them where I wanted to accept them. If I was comfortable accepting that he's an old man that likes to tell jokes and he's suffering from dementia at this time, versus he was one of my biggest nightmares as a child in the first 3 to 4 years of my life. And I had to go through hating him, wanting him dead for what he did to me, and feeling that for real. Not just, I thought about it one day, but it came to me to such a point that it scared me because I wanted my own father dead. I wanted him in pain for what he had done. And seeing that and feeling that was the beginning of my healing. Because if you want to put it in practical terms, even though that's John, that's your father, it's yes, and if a stranger had done exactly the same thing that he had done, would you have been as merciful on him if it wasn't your own parent? If you had read about what he did in the news to his child in the paper or on TV, would you say, but that's your father? It's you'd hate the hell out of that person for what they had done. The hatred is not because of the act. The hatred comes from the fact that the rage and the suffering that one experienced back then was denied as valid because somebody was taking something from you. He was taking life. He was soul destroying. He too was destroyed. Didn't make it right. That's why he did it. And he did it because in his reality, and as hard as this is to imagine that consciously you could allow that to happen to your own children, the 5-year-old in him did not envision that his childhood reality would become his own family's childhood reality. The 5-year-old in him did not see that his life would end where only 2 of his 4 children were there at the end by his bedside. And that the company that he had started, that I told you earlier I had made all that money for, his choices, he was penniless at the end of his life when his company was worth over $20 million in annual revenue. He went to Notre Dame. He was a star athlete. He was a handsome, intelligent man. He was a beautiful baby and a little boy. And he came from wealth. Not a privileged, arrogant person. He was a nuts and bolts, worked hard for his money, and then he went into business for himself because he saw how the world cheated people. he was part of a generation that was born in a time where we had just right in between a depression and 2 world wars. They didn't have the language that we have today. Didn't have the tools that we have today. This is not to forgive them for what they did, but it's really like to look deeper and go, what kind of life would they have wanted to live? And if you read my mother's letters to me and the cards she sent and all the gifts, you would have thought my mother, like, oh my God, John, your mother loves you so much. It's frightening to think that that person also tried to haphazardly kill you twice and caused you to want to kill yourself when you were 8 or 9 years old and went into the hospital. Because she was running away. She was trying to run away. She wanted a way out. Now, that is like, okay, yeah, that's pretty crazy. Yeah, like, I'm not saying it like, I had to cry to get to that. I cried to get to it, not to stay there in that position, but also understand the demons that were possessing her, the mental illness that she had, the level of anxiety that I had as a result of that mental illness. Borderline personality, schizoaffective disorder, where your girlfriend from college goes and meets your mom and thinks she's wonderful. Because she is, that part of her is. But that wasn't the reality. So these are, people would say, well, my parents were not that nuts. No, most people don't have those kind of parents. I don't believe that is the majority. But I do believe that our unconscious behavior, and like I said, if we're to honor them in the real way, it's that you honor them for the souls that they were born as, for the 5-year-old that wouldn't have chosen that path, and you can do something about it in this time. You have the power to change that story. They did not, and you pick up and carry on what they left you to work with and work on for whatever it means on this earth in relation to the people that you care for and love and want to. It's like you want to see people succeed. You want to see people, like, we say we want all these great things, and it's like we do the exact opposite. We're trying to take a world of man in power and mesh it with this spiritual one. And it's like, no, you don't have coexistence of the two. The energy has to flow in those directions in order for it to be self-evident that the system needs to change. If the system is all about, well, we get rid of the bad people and now we have technology, which I'm going to tell you is going to be one of the temptations of the next couple of years, is that if it's only limited to our understanding of time changing based on the events of what we survive through, and we don't learn the lesson, then greater cataclysms will come to teach us. It's sort of like if you don't raise the vibrational energy of the density in this realm that you live in through the heart, you cannot change time. It's quantum mechanics, quantum physics, I guess you could say, but the heart is, with mind coherence, it has the ability to predict future events and create future states through an idea and an emotion, a feeling in the mind. It's using both sides of the brain, the hemispheres. The idea in the left hemisphere, the emotion or feeling in the right hemisphere, and you create a future state. Joe Dispenza's work talks about this, Bruce Lipton, Greg Braden. I'm not an expert in these things, but I just know them to be true because I've seen the changes in people when you love them. And loving them is First, it's care for yourself. That's love manifested in action, in God's doing. So to just wrap it up with the narcissist and dealing with that and how to approach handling it, you may have to take several different approaches before you find the right one. A friend of mine who passed away over a year ago said to me that she had a narcissistic father, and how she dealt with him was patience and perseverance, but it wasn't force. Every time that he demanded, well, you know, blah, 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 and tried to change the subject, she says, no, I understand that, Dad, but what I really want to talk about is this. And she kept guiding it all the way back to that conversation with each deflection, everything. And she said after about 30 times, he finally just gave up and walked away. That's her own father.
Yeah, it seems like, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
It seems like it could also be different for different people, because there are so many also varieties of narcissism, like the classic narcissist maybe that we hear about in psychology is the overt narcissist, but there are also narcissists who are covert about their narcissistic traits. They are able to hide it well. Yeah. And you don't see that in them be like that in public, but so there are many different varieties.
Yes. So what I'm describing is kind of like just a general area, because there's malignant narcissism, which is really like Jeffrey Epstein type. They have sociopathic tendencies, very destructive types, and then there's the other types that you don't see, which is the one is they call him the people pleaser, right? And the people pleaser always is doing acts, good deeds, is like a very positive force and a connector, and they find meaning and purpose in the praise received as a result of their, networking or good act or good deed. But they have to be seen, right? They're not just, they don't do good behind the scenes. It's always an act, a show. It's always got to have a witness and someone to reinforce that good act. And whether it's done, out of like, oh my God, you're sick, I got to go get you that. I mean, there's good positive things that can come out of it. But when you withdraw the transactional emotional currency that they're looking for, that's when you really kind of see some bad things come about. And they can get into a really deep depression pretty quickly too. I've had a few of those and exhibited behaviors like that before, where my reality or my perception of reality would depend on having that kind of praise. Social media, I would say, is a really good place for people-pleasing narcissism, retweets, likes, comments. It fuels all the drives of the toddler ego, to be right or to be paid attention to be important. What else? What are some of the other ones that, because to me, I know there's varying shades of, there's like 4 distinct types, but I can describe them in different ways.
Yeah, there is so much, and this is a good thing that there is so much awareness coming out about these topics because years ago there were not even words to describe these personality types, but now at least we have a language to describe them, and I feel like that's where the awareness begins. Because it's a lot more confusing when you're not even able to like identify and name that this is what is happening. But now there's a lot of language, and there are also many strategies. Like they're mostly like suggestions, depending on your situation. One has to gauge like what's right for you.
My one advice with people is that when you finally encounter that somebody is a narcissist, or has narcissistic tendencies in their behavior. Because first of all, calling them out on that is not going to be useful. I'm not laughing because it's funny. It's because you've now basically put yourself on notice that you are no longer on their side and have called them the N-word. And I'm not being cute about that. I'm just saying that you've said the one word that they're not going to take well. And calling somebody that is only going to reinforce bad behaviors, they're only going to dig in further at that point, and they may even call you a narcissist, but definitely they will make sure that you pay in some way. So the hardest part is to, here's what I'll tell you, that this is the most difficult part. So their unconscious behavior affects your unconscious behavior. That's the first way to see this. Being able to push buttons in you that make you come back to them after they've hurt you, after they've lied to you, after they've been inconsistent, omitted certain truths, not taken responsibility, whatever it be that, again, it's the externalized world is the problem and the fault. Okay? It merely caused them to have to act that way. I've dealt with a few of those before. Like, my cursing caused them to say really bad words that they don't normally say, but somehow it still came out of them. Right? So it could be very sophisticated, but this is what I had a friend of mine recently, because she dated a guy who, real piece of work. And literally, because I sat down and thought about this, basically I thought about all of my behaviors when I was a younger man. Not that I was, but narcissistic behaviors. This is really the important thing, is that, see, scars of childhood remain there until the wound becomes open again by the right person. Okay, and so what we may think we know and what we've healed from, we actually haven't, and we get another lesson. And that means there's more to learn. It's not like, oh, all guys are this way, or all women are this way, right? Or all guys like this or this way. It's, you create a prison for yourself. Not that you don't identify, like, this is bad, this doesn't, but if you start looking at the world through that lens, that's how they F with you in your head, where you can't trust anybody anymore. That's really where you lose your life. So a person who doesn't know anything about you really, and doesn't show real care and compassion really when your time of need comes around, not when it's convenient to them to give, but when you're now interfering with their life and the way they want it to be. And it really has to do with the emotional capacity of that individual at that time. They may want, this is the thing, this is what I've learned. On the whole, most people want to believe what they think they are. And they want other people to validate that for them. Nobody wants to live in a contradiction, even if they do. That's not anybody's plan A. That's not, like, living in hell is not fighting your way through life, having to be on guard, having to be defensive is not a way to live a happy life for anybody. So they don't want that, but they can't get the thing that they want to actually happen, because that would require them to face themselves. So this girl that I talked to, I said, what he has to believe and what he actually does is why you're so screwed up. I mean, he messed with her, right? Creates a paradox in you. Because on the one hand, you have this, and on the other hand, you have that. And it's like, these are not, these two things, they don't match. They don't go together. They're complete polarizations. And who's to pay all the time? Me. I'm the one at fault. It's got to be me who has the problem, whatever it is, whatever it is. It's not even consequential in most cases. Like even if it was true, like even if the blame was there and it was absolutely true, it wouldn't be devastating, but it is. And so everybody else is going to feel that devastation emotionally, mentally, and maybe even physically. But what he did with her was he came back around again, wanted to see how she was doing, that she was okay, after he had caused her anguish and had left her and, completely withdrawn. And she thought all bad things of herself, what she could have done in order to not have him be angry, not have him believe falsehoods, right? To change his mind and tell him what the truth was, and then he would see and he would stop acting that way. And it doesn't work that way. It never works that way. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if there's... So what he had to believe in his mind in order to feel correct with the situation, he needed you to believe that in order for it to be real, because he himself didn't. He wants to be certain, but if he doesn't have that certainty from the closest person to him, then what does that mean for him? He's not even thinking at that level. But that's what he would have to think if he was even to begin to look at the things that he's doing that create the loop. Because as long as you keep dancing with that person, it's telling that person, well, I must be doing something right because this person is staying with me. This person means something to me at my convenience, right? When I'm feeling bad, they've got to be there to lift me up, pick me up, tell me I'm great. When they're feeling bad, I don't want any part of that. I don't need to deal with the real feelings of that human being right now because it's too much. Or it's like I have an obligation there and I'm like, and I've felt this, I've dealt with this myself. I mean, but I'm saying that thank God I didn't have that bad of a time. But I had to work this out in steps with an individual over months to see that my impulsivity to defend myself, which was not me being a narcissist, but seeing the scars of having narcissistic behavior in my parents and being in denial of the reality of what they did to their children and what they were in their lives. I couldn't get those answers from them. That's the painful part. And when they die, you're crying not because you miss them, but because you never had the time that you really were deserving of having with them in the way that a child would want to with their parents. You may have to watch it happen in the grandchildren because, again, depending on what we're all dealing with, the only person that you can be certain of is yourself. And I'm not saying that it's like, oh, well, don't worry about the narcissist. No, it's like the more honest you are and authentic you are with yourself, the less a narcissist is going to come after you. Because you don't have any chinks in the armor that they can pierce. And they may have to finally start dealing with themselves on some level if there is some good to come from, them being alone. Anyway, it's a very unfortunate feature of this time because it demands, it's being summoned during this time because our left hemisphere of our brain is being overstimulated and has been for the last 5 years with information of all types, good and bad. I don't say it's good and bad, but I'm just saying the net effect of this amount of information being poured out and debated into public and censored with censorship and everything else, it's like, well, it's a battle to be had. What kind of world do you want to live in? I mean, do you want to have enemies, or do you want to find a way to Not, it's not to let the enemy get off the hook with it, but it's like at a certain point you have to stop with where your enemies are. I mean, you can have villains anywhere. There can always be a problem to solve. There's always, it's like, but we're going outside like activists trying to stop the problem by calling it out and then saying the system has to be dismantled. And it's like, yeah, but what is it going to be replaced with? What is it going to be created? What's going to be created as a result of that information, that knowledge? Is it just now, well, here's where we really need to go, and this is what we need to put our, investment research in, technology into, our billionaire class needs to solve this problem for us? It's like, no. No. You're funneling it down to a small group of people who don't have your lived experience, which is your testimony to truth and life. Your own experience, your own personal experience, and your testimony, however you understand it to be, is the most powerful teacher, wisdom, guide, encyclopedia, and library you have. You can only know yourself better than anybody else outside of God. There is nobody that can know you better than yourself. And while it says, well, that's really profound and bold of you. Well, yeah, because the sky is blue and the grass is green. But the truth at the end of the day is that we make it more difficult for ourselves than we need to. We do all the other stuff outside and gather it all up. And it's like we hold this knowledge in our head and then we try to live by these beliefs and these rules. And it's like, yes, but at the end of the day, it's like if you go to the root cause of the problem and you heal it in yourself, then you can give that healing to other people because you're the living embodiment of that thing that where the fact and the meaning come together. And that's where, you can't just think of yourself to lecture from that point, but the discovery within yourself, the deepest authentic expressions of yourself that you uncover, that you will only ever know at the end of the day. I mean, you can tell them to people, of course, but those are the things that equal so much value, that has nothing to do with like, oh, this book over here and this, literature and this history, and they'll all tell you everything. It's like, no, it's all one and the same. It's all a metaphor of the same thing. Your story. The story of God in the form of man or woman, human being, trying to figure out what it is in relation to where it is in space and time. And the question is, are you a human being having a supernatural experience, or are you a supernatural spiritual being having a human experience? And so that's kind of like what we're trying to figure out, and how to get to that balance in ourselves that would then bring about another existence of humanity, supposedly.
That reminds me, in our phone conversation, you mentioned something about the new human species, the possibility of a new human species that would transcend this divisive consciousness. Can you share a bit about that, how that new evolution looks like?
Yeah. Well, and I'm seeing this broadly, genetics determine our lives. I don't believe that to be true. I think it's a part of the equation. Let's say ancestral traumas, right? Ancestral traumas, whatever they be, mental health, however you quantify them, they are features in the collective consciousness of that family or that unit or that community that have an impression upon the coding of the DNA. So they've been able to extract the violent gene, right? This was several years ago. In the last 15, 20 years, they talked about this. Where somebody's what I would argue would be ancestral bloodline trauma encoded in the DNA of the child, for which the child does not experience violence at any level in childhood and grows up to be more peaceful than, quote, an average human being, whatever the average baseline of aggressive response or not is. But they said that if that same person with that signature in their DNA, that ancestral trauma, were to be abused, were to have trauma in childhood, then their response in anger and fury would be greater than what most human beings would do. Okay, so what does that mean? What it means is that we have to balance the forces of our own unconscious darkness within ourselves if we are to bring heaven to earth. In other words, all that the darkness occupies in space in our unconscious minds, which make up 90 to 95% of our thoughts, we have to take a greater leap forward in the awareness of what we surround ourselves with, what we put out there. I mean, you look at entertainment, you look at music. This is not about hating everything and warding off, Hollywood. But it's really to understand that the energies that are manifested into our digital and physical world play a role in shaping our consciousness and our awareness. They reprogram our subconscious mind. They speak to the unconscious parts in ourselves. There's extremes of this in child abuse cases where people become possessed demonically, temporarily, and forget after the act is over how they even thought of picking up a knife and stabbing the other person and killing them, including their own children. They heard a voice. And to say, oh, okay, well, I believe them. No, I'm just saying that's a feature that oftentimes doesn't get reported in the news, but it's in the police report, that the person got angered at such a level that a voice entered their head, said, pick up the knife and stab him and kill him. And they followed it. And then afterwards it was like, what the hell just happened, right? That's extreme. That's hard for us to understand or accept and go, oh God, that was terrible. I should feel bad and not put that person in jail, right? But on the other side of things, I think it's a combination of using, when I say this, I mean it in the way that bridges us back into humanity, is to use technology as a means to bring us back into a higher conscious awareness. For example, like if you're saying virtual reality, right? Virtual reality, for most people, they just see the goggles, but there's also the controllers, and then there's also the suit, your body suit that you can wear. In those things, they stimulate your sensations of feel and touch, pressure, air, heat and cold, vibrations, shakes, sonic booms. There's all sorts of ways that you can hit frequencies with resonance that activate neural pathways to our subconscious mind and our feeling. In other words, virtual reality is a metaphor to reality, but the brain does not choose what is real and what is imagined. It treats it equally. The subconscious mind treats both real and imagined reality as the same. So whatever one thinks or imagines, they also feel and experience it as if it was real. This has been proven in recreations of sound where there was just video or audio of a man down on the ground and 5 people standing around him. They were able to take, this was 6 or 7 years ago, they were able to take that audio and recreate a 3-dimensional environment around the man, positioning everybody and their voices where they were in relation to that digital information. But the remarkable thing was that everybody who saw that digital recreation of that event with the live audio recorded years before, they had the same feelings, chemical, biological processes, quote, thoughts going off inside of them that had nothing to do with the reality of it, but the past of it. Because the vibrational energy was calling and speaking within them. See, the more we learn the deeper parts of how precious and magnificent that machinery that we're born into is, the more we will preserve it. The more we will preserve it in children. We won't sit there and wait for laws to be passed and governance in schools and, fights at the school board in order to get crap overturned. It's like, no, like, we need to teach our children, these are the intrinsic values and gifts they're born with. Telepathic powers. The empathy, the compassion, the emotional reality of childhood has to be dealt with in such a sacred way that it can't be, like, in other words, we have to reverse the learning curve, which is suffer, 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 and then you finally wake up, or start to say, I can't live my life this way anymore. It's not a very fun illusion anymore, right? But it's to go, what is my trajectory to here, to this awakening? Why did it take so long? What did I have to go through in order to, in this time, when if I now look back at 20, I go, of course I should have done this. I would have been a hell of a lot happier, but couldn't do it. Based on the result. May have wanted to do a lot of other things, but it took, hitting this time to go, But if we could change that, we would have wanted to know a long time before. That's what I'm talking about on the most fundamental levels. Like, humanity comes to the understanding is like, no, what can we do to reduce the unnecessary suffering in myself and in other people? That's the new consciousness. It's selfless. It doesn't require a charity to come along, a non-profit to be formed. It's conscious awareness. The effect of it being in the public conscious and that companies begin to do and act, that's fine. That's always there's always going to be a follow. There will always be a follow, but bringing forward ideas that are based on lived experiences, that have required the deepest self-reflection, as you learn, as you work through it, those become your greatest teachers, because now you know the struggle of everybody else who, even if they know that, you already know, even if you know that, what a struggle it is to try and change the program in you, just in you. Let alone try to go, hey guys, I got the answer, come here. You really don't. Excuse me. You really don't, because you're still learning too. And that's the thing. If everybody taught themselves to be a student rather than to think of themselves as a master because they figured out a few things that everybody goes, wow, It's like, but there's more. And yes, I am terribly flawed. It's not like a confession. It's just more of there are plenty of things that, hey, everything you say sounds really great. I'd love to spend a day with you. And then you spend a day with me and you go, oh my God, you still have a lot to work on. And say, yeah, I do. So that's the only way to live. I mean, it doesn't mean that that's your excuse to live. It just says, well, I'm just going to give it my best shot today and not think of all the things that I haven't done that I should have done or I could have done, and actually getting rid of that language. It's really get rid of that language, and because you're not going to enjoy life by having a checklist of things that you have to complete as tasks, and then you'll finally get there. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, I guess anybody can believe anything, but I'm just saying, like, it doesn't feel really good when you're just enduring the whole damn thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really great message, John, especially because sometimes even among some of these spiritual teachers and leaders, there can be this attitude of like, I've arrived at this perfect place, and now I'm a perfect being. But you're constantly working on yourself. It's constantly refining. So it's humbling.
It's facing the things about yourself that are there, and you don't know that they are, but you do, and you don't have the words yet to identify what it is, which is why it's still there. And so sometimes you have to, when I say humble yourself, when I say humility and humbling, people, have different understandings of that. What I'm saying is you go, I see where my role is in this. I see that in the intersection, two cars almost hit each other, right? They went right past the stop sign and almost hit each other head on without seeing each other. And then when they finally realized that, oh my God, and your first response is, what the hell were you doing? And he's looking, what the hell were you doing? It's like, and then you have to back up and bring the cars together and say, dude, I am so sorry. My wife is giving birth to our first child, and my mom, you don't know what the story is until you do. So if you create the story in your mind, what it is, it only perpetuates. You have to take ownership for the fact that, holy shit, I'm alive here to know that I made a mistake. And I won't let that happen again. And I might, if the other person is willing to just spend a little bit of time, not that they're trying to manipulate me into see it their way, but I'm just going to listen to them, and then I'm going to tell them, well, okay, that may be true for you, but here's where I'm coming from. And I'm just happy that you're alive and I'm alive right now, and know that we didn't mean to do this to each other since we're alive, rather than like, let's argue like we're both dead now.
I think that's a beautiful message to end this video at, John. I think there's a lot to take on in, like, there are so many pearls of wisdom you have shared in this video. If someone wants to reach out to you, do you have a website or any contact information?
Sure. So as a filmmaker, I have on my website, norestrictionsent.com. It's No Restrictions Entertainment, but abbreviated. You can find all of our movies there on Vimeo. You can search for our films by name on most major platforms, except Netflix. But our films are on Tubi, Amazon, Vimeo on demand, and we're in 70 different countries. If people want to support our work, we just want you to enjoy it. And if you want to reach out to me by message, I'm on Instagram and most social media at No Restrictions, Telegram, No Restrictions JPR. And if you want to send me a message, you can do so through our website. And I try to answer all of them however I can, whenever I can. So
thank you. And I also want to thank audience for their support and watching this video. Thank you. Bye.